In this video, we'll be looking at aggregate demand. This is a topic, one of the first topics you'll probably encounter in macroeconomics. So what is aggregate demand? Well, just looking at the word aggregate, we think total. So that's basically what it is. It's a total demand in an economy, total demand for goods and services in an economy over time. And so, whenever we hear the word demand, we know there's going to be a curve. And so let's just draw what the aggregate demand curve is going to be. So we have our axes. On the x-axis, we've got real GDP, and on the y-axis, we have price level. You will often hear this called general price level, which basically, the prices of all the goods in the economy. And then the real GDP, is expenditure on goods and services, and the total value of production in an economy. And so, it's shaped exactly the same as the demand curve will be. It slopes downwards. And we label this curve AD. Why does this curve slope downwards? Well, at a high price level, we're consuming in an economy fewer goods, and at a lower price level, we're consuming more. This is basically because we can afford to do that. If prices are lower, our income's going to stretch further, and so we can afford to, consume at a higher quantity. Now, what causes the AD curve to shift? So when we've got an outward shift of the AD curve, it's going to look something like this. AD shifts to AD1. And so, for any price, call this P1, we're now producing, we've got a higher quantity of real GDP. You'll often see this as Y1, Y2, but, however you want to denote it. And we call this economic growth. On the other hand, if AD shifts inwards to AD2, we'll call this economic decline. Maybe we're going into a recession, and because real GDP is falling. And the definition of a recession is 2 consecutive quarters of negative economic growth. And economic growth is negative because, like we say, real GDP is falling. And so, obviously, we've discussed the terminology about what these shifts are, but what actually causes them? There's actually an equation to this. We have aggregate demand is equal to C plus I plus G plus X minus M. So this C stands for consumption. As consumers, we spend on food, we spend on meals, we spend on, we go to the supermarket, we go shopping. All this is consumption. Next, we've got investment. This might be, businesses buying new machinery, individuals buying houses, etc. Next, we've got government spending. This is basically, when the government releases their budget, what are they spending on? Healthcare, military, etc. And here we've got net exports. So this would be exports minus imports. And basically, if we've got a higher level of imports, that's going to have a negative effect on aggregate demand. If we've got a higher level of exports, it's going to have a positive effect on aggregate demand. And so, if consumption increases, for example, if consumer confidence is high, that means that consumers have a lot of optimism about the economy. And if you've got a lot of optimism about the economy, you're going to spend more. And as a result, consumption increases, holding everything else constant, and AD shifts from AD to AD1. And then we'd have economic growth. So in a lot of exam questions, you might be asked something like, what is the impact of a decrease in interest rates? Let's just write this down. So the first thing we want to do is, if this was an exam question, we want to define interest rates. Interest rates are the cost of borrowing. Okay, but we're looking for a graphical analysis here. So we have price level, and then we have real GDP. We want our AD curve, labelled AD. And then what happens? So if interest rates fall and the cost of borrowing falls, then that means that, it's cheaper to take out loans. It's cheaper to buy a new car and finance. It's cheaper to, buy a house. This causes levels of consumption and investments to increase. And as a result, since consumption and investment are components of aggregate demand will shift outwards from AD to AD1. And we've not gone to aggregate supply yet, so we're just gonna we can draw aggregate supply in here, so AS. And then we can draw equilibrium, so we have equilibrium here and equilibrium here. So first it's P1, and then Y1, and then we go to, I should have done P and Y, but you know, you get the point. We have Y2 and then P2 here. And in our description we'd say the impact is an increase in real GDP as we go from Y to Y, Y1 to Y2. However, you know, there's also a side effect of this decrease in interest rates. The price level is increasing from P1 to P2. So what does this mean if the price level is increasing? Well, if prices are increasing in an economy, that means we've got inflation. And so this is a phenomenon that we call demand pull inflation. It's when the demand side of the economy, aggregate demand, increases, and this leads to, you know, an increase in prices. And we can kind of link this to microeconomics when we talked about the price mechanism. In the price mechanism, when there's a lot of demand, prices will rise because, you know, suppliers need to cope with that demand. So they raise prices to, you know, ration the demand. So that's basically why aggregate demand works the way it does, why we've got a movement along and why we have shifts. Yeah, that's the basic premise of demand.